It's how this express Deputy needs impartial investigation. And Deputy D wants you to believe that he's objective, neutral, and impartial. He really wants you to believe that. But I think within the first 15 questions, we revealed that that's not quite true, because if he's so impartial and so neutral and so objective, why is he handing notes to the prosecutor and whispering during the whole trial? Because he's helping her to try to convict Brian Reed. So right there, we know he's not being honest about that, but he wants you to see him in a certain light. And then what else does he do that just may not be just quite so honest? Remember when I asked some deputy, how many times does a person have to lie to you before you start to doubt them? And he swiveled his head and looked at you and blah, 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 blah. And they looked back at me. And I'm like, no, deputy, that's not how we play this. We play it by asking you a question that calls for an answer, and you're going to answer the question. You're not going to try to blah, 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 blah. So it calls for a number. What's the number? Then he looks at me and goes, 1 time. I'm like, good, we agree upon that. Even if that person wears a badge and is a police officer, and what did he say? What does he say? That person should be held to a higher standard. I couldn't agree with him more. Now let's talk about the testimony that you give regarding this photograph. When the prosecutor asks you, what's the significance of this photograph? Like, because this tanning bed was down and all the other ones were up. So to me, that was significant. Whoa, that sounds kind of damning, doesn't it? I mean, it sounds like they got their first piece of actual evidence in this case, folks. But fortunately for us, unfortunately for Brian, we were all keeping an open mind and waiting for, I hope, cross-examination of this fact. And what did we learn upon cross-examination? This very important fact, maybe their biggest fact in the whole case. I mean, it's between this and dust on the hood of the cover, or, a dust pattern that did not match, or he thought was unusual on the top of the wall. Those are their 3 big facts in this case. Well, let's take a look at the first one. I said to Deputy, this is such an important fact. Is there some reason of me I didn't read the police report thoroughly, but I didn't see any fact about the tanning bed being down in the police report. And he says, no, it's not in there. Like, okay. And let's see, this very same photograph, you see that? This is why we mark exhibits on it. Exhibit B during the preliminary examination. I asked Aida, asked you the question, what's the significance of this photo, Deputy? And your answer, interestingly enough, was, question is, please take a look at Defendant's Exhibit B. Tell me what's the significance of the picture. Answer, that is a shot of the tanning booth inside the room 5, ma'am. Room 5. And what? With the cover closed. And what is the significance of that picture? That is to show the relationship of the wall height. And unfortunately, there's no scale attached. So the relevance of it has probably been minimized. But what I wanted to show was the fact that with the booth down, that someone could stand on top of that and gain access to look over the top of that wall. That the wall does not indeed run up to the ceiling. And which one do you believe Mr. Reed was in? If you could just mark that. It would be right here. It would be this corner right here, ma'am. If you could circle that and mark that and put your initials. It would be right here. This area also coincides with where the dust was disturbed. So you see, we have this photo, and there's his little MB right there, and this has now been admitted into evidence. So, now, and I asked him, you remember when I asked him to look at it, read it? He's like, was trying to refuse to do it or something. And what's interesting is, he reviewed this before he got up on the stand. So you would think he would remember what testimony he had given. But was he counting on, what is he counting on, us being asleep over here? And then further evidence of his desire to help the prosecutor would be this. This is a conversation he's having with Paul. But I asked him, being Paul, if it was all right if I go ahead and close the cover of the tanning bed and stand on it. He said, yes, please do. So I stood up there. Now, isn't that odd that he would ask Paul to close the cover so he could stand on it? Like the cover was already closed? I mean, does he think that he's like Anthony Dubé? And he could just say whatever he wants without being held accountable? I mean, this is a man's life we're talking about here. And then what other choices does he make in this investigation? Well, he wants us to believe that this isn't a good printable surface. And that's why it's not just out of laziness or carelessness or bias that he chooses not to call in an evidence tech. I mean, look at that. He wants to tell you about the dust on top of the wall and how it's disturbed and how it's different, but he doesn't take a photograph of it. So are we just supposed to trust him? Like we should trust him about the picture there of the thing? Well, why? Because the flash on his camera is not working. Oh, well, there's a good reason not to get evidence. I mean, there's a good reason not to call an evidence tech and get evidence because the flash isn't working. I mean, I guess, that would explain it. But what else? I mean, he had to get up there, and you can't look over that wall without putting your hands up against the wall. It's impossible. That's why, I try to think everything that, that it could be possibly done and try to prepare a case and investigate. And so he's, this is the exact wall that's inside that tank booth. I mean, exact, obviously we didn't cut a hole in the wall, but it's the exact color, exact texture, exact in every way. It matches that wall. And he wants to say, I don't know if it's a good surface. Of course, he doesn't even try. But we know that, in fact, that a fingerprint is discernible on that wall. That if a police officer really cared about the truth, instead of making, 13 people sit here for 4 days to try to figure a case out, he could have done it right there. And I said, why did you do it? I don't know what's happening. Could have been wearing gloves. Could have been doing a lot of things. Sure. Did you hear any testimony from anybody about him wearing gloves that day? Or there would be any gloves in the tanning salon? There isn't any. It's just excuses for him not doing his job. And when they don't do their job, you have to do yours. That's just how it works, folks. Excuses. And then he wants you to believe, we just detained him. We didn't arrest him. What's the difference? Well, detained, you might have a chance of going free. Whereas you're under arrest, you ain't going home. Great. So we talked about it further. You need probable cause to arrest somebody. You have to, there's just an investigation to detain him. And what do we learn about his detention? We learn about his detention that they chain him to a wall, and then they drill him with lies, deceit, and mislead him for an hour and a half. That's what we learn about. That's what we learn about his detention. And then they release him. Because at that time, remember I said to him, do you have probable cause? And I'm pretty certain, the first time I asked him, I said, you release him because you don't have probable cause. You have to have probable cause to, make an arrest. And he said, yeah, it's not my call. I just give a report and send it off to the prosecutor's office. That's how it works. I don't make the call. Nobody asked me for my opinion. So great, because probable cause, remember, he hasn't done any investigation except time to walk down the hall when he goes to serve a subpoena. That's his continued investigation he wants to share with us. It only took 7.5 seconds, so it's possible. Time to walk down the hall, but is there anything else? So, how could he, if he didn't have probable cause on the day, how could he possibly have probable cause now? And on the scale, which maybe I should have to draw out though, is that there's reasonable suspicion, which is enough to do an investigation, okay? You need reasonable suspicion to do an investigation. After that, we need probable cause, and that's more likely than not. No, actually, probable cause is just, we'll have to look that definition up. Then there's preponderance of the evidence, which is more likely than not. That's a civil case. Just a slight, 51 to 49, just a slight tipping of the scales. And we have clear and convincing evidence, which is like a much higher standard burden of proof. The kind that's like used in like family court. And if they're going to take your children away because they say, you've been a bad parent and we're the state and we're going to take your kids, that's clear and convincing evidence. Or if there's like a fraud charge. If you accuse somebody of fraud, you have to prove that clear and convincing evidence because it's such an ugly accusation. And then we have beyond a reasonable doubt. So the deputy down here isn't even at probable cause on the day of the incident, has done no investigation. But now the government wants you to get all the way beyond a reasonable doubt with the same evidence on that day, folks. The same evidence on that day. With actually no more actual evidence or but we don't have the same evidence on that day. Today we have a very different evidence. We have 3 hours of Anthony DeBay perjuring himself, and then we have evidence of the officer's investigation. So now we've gone from any possible suspicion back down to 0. Is really where we've gone in this trial. And then there's another jury instruction that I think is important in this case, and that jury instruction is about evaluating a witness's credibility. And one of the paragraphs says, did the witness try to answer the question, or did the witness attempt to evade the attorney and not answer the question? Now, what do we see from Anthony DeBay? But we can expect that from him because he's a sociopath. But what did we get from the deputy? We got the same type of thing. His thinking that he could just sit up here and say whatever he wanted and not answer questions. I mean, it was getting ridiculous, but to his benefit, because he was up there for 2 hours and 10 minutes on cross-examination, so to his benefit, from 10:30 to 12:40, actually I think we took a break in there, so maybe it was only 2 hours. But to his benefit, after about a half an hour or 40 minutes, he started answering questions. That was only when he realized that his whatever that is, it's like a shell game to him. Try to keep moving the shells around, see if the lawyer can follow it. And so when he realized he's not moving the shells faster than my eyes are going, then he starts answering the questions. And so, but you compare his testimony to Paul Honkin, another police officer, and say which one was just trying to tell us what they knew, and which one was trying to mislead us and convince us. I think the answer is pretty clear on that one.